How is everyone doing? Again, myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz. We're back with another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today is episode 37, the value of learning to live at maintenance, intermittent fasting versus continuous dieting, and menstrual cycle periodization. Brandon, we had a lot of fucking killer feedback last week for the podcast we did with Eric Helms, man. And we're bringing him on for another one. Brandon's scheduling that out. So obviously that could be like a 10-part series. But thank you guys for sharing that, because oftentimes we're like, well, did people like that? Did they not like it? We don't really know where to go. So thank you guys, because that helped let us know directions you guys like for us to chat with. But B, man, how's your last 7 days been, bro?
Man, I got to tell you, I've had a little bit rough of a last week, to be honest with you. Last week during one of my lower body focus sessions, I ended up re-aggravating my lumbar spine strain that I actually had sustained during that car accident I had a couple years back, if you remember. Actually, after one of the first PECs, I was hit by a distracted driver from behind, full speed on a holiday. Obviously, ended up having to have surgery. And so this past week, I've just been pretty immobilized, to say the least. So I've been working a lot of mobility, a lot on rehabilitation, a lot of those tools and tricks and different tactics that I utilize post injury initially, as well as during my 12-week period post surgery. So I've just been getting back to that and really trying to make sure that this doesn't end up any worse than it did last time. You know what I mean? So, at the last time when I ended up deciding to go for the 2 surgeries that I did, it was because I was in so much pain, dude. I couldn't sleep through the night. So I'm praying to God that isn't the case. But other than that, man, I've just been preparing, I've been busy preparing for the upcoming Christmas holiday. When this comes out, Christmas will be the next day. So I want to, relay to our audience, Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah or whatever, Kwanzaa, whatever celebratory occasion that you partake in. But we're recording this earlier in the week. So I'm just preparing, obviously doing the present wrapping and all that kind of stuff. And then this will actually be our last podcast recording of 2022. I just realized. And that's because we actually recorded
an extra
next week's podcast in advance, so that we would have, and honestly, I know that you take the last week off of the year, and that's something I generally don't do, but it ended up perfect timing, because what I do during the last week of every year is that, obviously that's going to allow us to spend more time with our families. That's of utmost importance. But I always make it a point that during the final week of every year, I spend some extra time reflecting back on the year that's passed and doing a yearly review, both from like a business and then a personal perspective. So what I'll do next week is and goals going forward. So I always do that on a yearly basis. And then I also do a statistical report on all my data analytics within my clientele. So I'll see, how many leads did I get within a year? What was my, my generation of clients? What was my trajectory in terms of growth? So it's always good to look back. And this will be the first year that I've been full-time with coaching. So it should look much different than 2021 did. So I'm excited to do those reports, to do those breakdowns. I also look at like, what type of clientele am I attracting, because I don't have a niche, and I have never niched myself down. So it's really, it's been interesting over the years, because just as we transform and we evolve, as people, we do as coaches. So then we attract different people, we build up our network, and we start working with either higher end clientele or maybe a little bit more specific clientele as we develop our skills and our expertise within certain demographics. So it's always exciting for me to do this. So I'm looking forward to doing that once, my schedule's a little bit lighter. But other than that, man, how was your last 7 days?
Man, it's been really, really good. Keegan had surgery on Friday. He had 6 teeth pulled out, his baby teeth. Wow. He got very lucky that so with our bone disease, we have like a lot of teeth issues. They had thought that they were going to have to cut a couple out. And he ended up, when he opened his mouth, she's like, oh, things have changed a lot. So Ninja got lucky, man. Within 2 hours post-op or 3 hours post-op, he was like, can I eat? I'm like, sure. And I watched him devour a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And then a few hours later, he's like, we have Chick-fil-A? And I'm like, sure. And then I watched him smash that. And then he came back home and ate more ice cream. And I'm like, were you just feeling hungry lately? He's like, oh, no, my teeth were killing me. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? He's like, I figured I'd be fine. I'm like,
he's like,
all right. Like, yeah, I get it. So other than that, man, business is good. It's starting to pick up some of the inquiries, the usual stuff that people are kind of like, all right, coaching's back on their radar. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go up on my rates a little bit or not. I'm thinking about just adding another $25, $30. just because taxes keep going up.
Absolutely.
Things like that. But I'll reach those decisions on my own. But otherwise, dude, I've just been doing weird. I got into this weird dive about mercury.
Oh God, here we go in another mineral.
No. It's a toxin. It's a heavy metal. But of interesting note, it competes for magnesium. And I had a woman who I was chatting with, and we've been together for a couple months now. And she's been with some other hot name coaches, but I was like, hey, when did things really change for you? And it was when she had like a bunch of dental work done. So she had like 4 fillings put in. Okay. And so, the mercury overload, there's a lot of stuff showing that. But the interesting thing is she started developing arrhythmias within 6 months after it. So mercury competes for magnesium.
Getting it removed after getting it removed?
No, she still got them in. So that's when she noticed that the arrhythmias started kicking up when we started putting this timeline together. I'm on a Zoom with her and I got my whiteboard and I'm like, And long story short, because we kept up in the magnesium and it wasn't doing anything for the arrhythmias, because that's the first thing you do. Like when people have like PVCs or PACs, preventricular contractions, atrial contractions, you tell them to take magnesium. I suffer from that.
What form were you using with her?
I was using various forms. We went through them all, from glycinate to tartrate to the other one.
Yeah, because I mean, there are certain bioavailabilities that they're only 3%. So you need to look for a bonded, chelated formula that generally you want to look for like albumin minerals attached to it. So that would be a bisglycinate, which would be 2 molecular bonds of glycinate, which also helps with, GABA secretion and also like that parasympathetic nervous system activation. Taurate's another good one. Obviously, bonded.
She did use that one,
which is extremely good. And then threonate is another one that's actually really good for crossing the blood-brain barrier as well.
Yeah. So where we kind of arrived with it was she's found a biological dentist and we're going to get those fillings taken out so she could get them replaced with non-mercury. But literally, dude, all her issues started the moment this dent, like you could go right back to it. And that lets you know how everyone's so different to the sensitivities, what our bodies are put through, right? Like I have like 4 of those fillings and I'm probably going to get them out sooner or later, but I don't have any issues. Do you know what I mean? So, and I think it's probably because I sweat a lot multiple times a day. I'm always detoxifying different ways, but it lets you know that the detoxification pathways and just like our overall environment is just getting more toxic. And I just 100%. Think people, certain genes, they just can't do it. So that's like when I tell people, like with coaching, when you go into coaching, if you go into it looking for a 12-week fix, you're going to fail, because especially once you get over 35, especially like near the 40 plus range, there's really a lot more factors that could be in. And for this woman, it was a case of dental work, because like she even noticed brain fog. Like there were things that we just started going through and she's like, shit, all this kind of adds up. And I'm like, yeah, I think you got your answer.
And also it's not only the inter-individuality between people, between sexes, it's also the fact that time compounds in all aspects. So when you have really good positive habits, they compound over time. So think about someone like yourself or someone like Jason. You guys are in your 40s, but you feel like you're in your 20s still. However, in the inverse, a lot of times clients come to me and maybe they're a chronic dieter or there's someone that has dealt with hypothalamic amenorrhea, so the loss or the cessation of their menstrual cycle. And they come to me and they expect a quick fix. And I try to explain to them, listen, the condition, the state that you're in. So for instance, I just had a woman reach out to me and she had been chronic dieting for years. She had Hashimoto's previously, hypothyroidism. And so she had a recent diet. She did a contest prep. She had, not resolved, but she had had her Hashimoto's treated. And so she went into a contest prep and it was a really harsh diet. I mean, like a crash diet type of scenario. She was over restricted, over cardioed, everything you could think of, high training volume, 2 hours of cardio per day, 1,100 calories per day. And she was really, really suffered to the stage. And she had a massive weight regain post show. And so this past week, I'm working through, actually I put her in a primer phase rather than a reverse diet phase, because I can't titrate calories up because she's already rebounded so much and regained so much fat that she's not in a good place, both mentally and physically, but also from a metabolic health perspective, because that's where we're seeing more visceral fat gain. We're seeing a higher prevalence or a higher likelihood and predisposition towards insulin resistance. So, and she's also having digestive issues. So these are all compounding factors that we spoke about on our reverse dieting podcast. However, it's really important to keep in mind that the situation you're in, like, she was looking at, hey, I was in a 12 to 6 week prep, and I sustained all these these issues. But no, we had to go back to our history. And I said, years ago, you had, Hashimoto's, you had hypothyroidism, you dealt with all these side effects of symptoms until you were diagnosed, and then you were put on medication, which helped to mitigate a lot of those symptoms. But this is through years of you having chronic dieting. Yes, the 12 or 16-week prep that you just did recently within the fall, it compounded those issues. But it's almost like things are laying right under the surface, and it's almost like an icebreaker. You know what I mean? And so you only see what's on the top layer above the water. However, there's all this stuff below the water, that these are things that are waiting, these root causes that are waiting to come up. And, certain things can exacerbate them and certain things can mitigate or offset them. So it really is, we are a product of our habits, our behaviors that compound over time. So there's this domino effect to consistency in both directions. So when you've consistently had certain, unhealthy behaviors and habits, they're going to compound over time. And that's where you get hit at 30, 40, 45. I have a lot of women that are, entering that age of menopause, or they're in that perimenopause state. And, they're saying, I felt so good for so many years, but they also had an unhealthy lifestyle. So they were almost able to get away with it. But, in physiology, there's a cost for everything we do. So there is no free lunch in physiology. So whether you pay for it now in the moment or you pay for it later, a lot of these things, and when I say pay, I don't mean to like you're getting punished, but these things compound and they add up over time and they accumulate. And eventually sometimes they hit you like a freight train and you think it's just what you've done in the last year. No, it's what you've done in the last 5 to 10 years. So we really got to think about that. And I often have that conversation with clients when I'm trying to get them to think more of the future when they make decisions and really think about this as a long-term play, a long-term process, as an investment. We're making a daily deposit each and every day that you eat well, that you remain active, that you manage your stress, that you get good sleep quality. It's not just about how you feel in the present moment, but also how you're going to feel 5, 10 years down the road. If you make these sacrifices or you make the investments into healthy habits now, it's going to pay off both in the short term and in the long term. So I really like people thinking about it through that viewpoint.
Yeah. And I think that it just brings to me, this case is just more of an idea of like, you can go through all the fancy 40 bazillion supplement protocols. You could go through the fastings. You can go through all the other stuff. But sometimes it was just a simple thing that like a dental procedure in this case. And you got to think about that stuff. And usually when people start doing it, the light bulbs go off. And I think that's where good coaching comes in. When you can just, take 15 minutes, hop on a phone call with someone and be like, yo, what, like, when did this really start? Like, when can you go back and say life sucked, at this point?
Peeling back the layers of the onion.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. All right, man. Let's tag into this shit. Otherwise, like I said, my last 7 days have been good. I'm looking forward to our little break. It's been cool that we've done this for 38 episodes and got a fuck ton more to go for sure. All right. So we have a listener Q&A, B. And then below that, it says on recent podcasts. So I guess this is about you, is what they're saying. Because this one I did not do.
So this was a listener Q&A that we received. These are all questions from listeners of this show, as well as other shows that we do as well. But this has crossover because we've discussed, maintenance phases, this particular question. So I'll let you lead me in with it. But it was about a statement that I did make.
Yep, sure. So on a recent podcast, Brandon said, he thinks maintenance phases are essential. The person asked, well, why is that? And what benefits does a maintenance phase provide? I think they're overlooked. I think so many people go all gas and all brake. And I think that there's a little middle that needs to be had. And I could say that as a seasoned vet. I look back and I'm like, I put on 9 pounds in 18 months since my last show. And I spent quite a bit of time
living in a deficit.
Nope. I spent quite a bit of time in the maintenance, quite a bit of time in surplus, little pull downs here and there. Keep relatively lean, but yeah, no, I think they serve their place if you can really understand what your maintenance is at, and really follow through that. So go ahead and elaborate on this, B, man, what you're kind of getting at with that in terms of what benefits does a maintenance phase provide, and why do you think they're essential?
Yeah, so I actually heard back from this listener right before you got on the show. So I do want to, say thank you for, inquiring and providing this question. And also she heard this not only on our podcast, but because we spoke about when we talked about reverse dieting versus recovery dieting, we did cover the importance or the benefit of maintenance, but in the respect of getting back to maintenance after a diet. However, she did also hear me speak about this on a podcast episode that I did with a client of mine, Jeremiah Bayer, on the Living Lean podcast. So I want to elaborate and kind of speak on different things than I spoke about previously on both of those podcasts. And so really the reason why I said that, or the reason I believe maintenance phases are essential, is because although many find that dieting is difficult, most fail in the process of most don't fail in the process of losing fat and weight. We see statistically that around 86% of people will lose a significant portion or significant amount of fat over their lifetime. But on average, only 5% of those individuals actually keep it off for an extended period of time, which shows that most people, most dieters, they struggle with fat loss maintenance, not losing fat in and of itself. And this is why I believe taking a phase where we focus, we set our sights on maintaining and on maintenance calories after a fat loss phase has ended is as important or even more important than the fat loss phase itself. And I also think that it's important to realize that just because the fat loss phase is over and maybe the restrictive diet that you were on has passed, you're done with that, it's finished. That doesn't mean that the positive habits that you've developed or you've cemented that have allowed you to make progress along the way are things that you should no longer have to do or you should no longer maintain, because that is honestly one of the main mistakes that so many make in that post dieting period. And this is why I always try to frame fitness and the dieting, the training, the physical activity, and the movement that are involved in it as a lifestyle, rather than a temporary journey that leads to an end destination or a goal, as that latter approach often leads many to regaining as much or more than they lost in the diet phase itself. And that's often because, a lot of people look at a diet as a temporary fix and they go right back to their previous lifestyle and the habits they had previously immediately after hitting their fat or their weight loss goals. So they get to a certain body composition, or they hit that 120 pounds or 130 pounds, or maybe a guy at 200 pounds. All of a sudden they're like, hey, all bets are off. I'm back to, what I was doing. And they forget that maintenance of habits, it's not about just maintaining your calorie intake. I would never tell someone, hey, listen, you finished a diet, you were in a 500 or 600 calorie deficit, you got to stay there in perpetuity. I always suggest that dieting should be, dieting for fat loss should be phasic, but the maintenance of the habits, the behaviors, the physical activity, the high training intensity, that is something that you should try to maintain. And often, I find personally that many people want to maintain as much fat loss as possible, especially within like your general population or your lifestyle clientele. So that's where I find these maintenance phases to be so useful. And, that's when I like to implement them, as it allows us to maintain most of the results that we got from a fat loss phase, while also allowing, the client or the individual to eat a higher intake and have some more flexibility, which improves how they feel, how they perform in the gym, their ability to actually adhere to the diet and to a healthier nutritional pattern of life, and then also their quality of life. And then beyond just those benefits, there's many other benefits that maintenance phases provide, such as, it helps us get into a better routine and overall structure in place. So this isn't just, maintenance phases aren't just something you should do after a diet, but these are things that you could throw in other time periods within the year. And a lot of times what I find is that these can be beneficial, as many fall off the wagon because they go through extremes. So they're either always trying to diet, or they're in the exact opposite direction, they're overeating. So it's like, they're either underfueling themselves or overeating. And so really what I try to get people to do is to realize that you need to have a time period in which you spend enough time at maintenance, because this is going to allow you to restructure your lifestyle and not focus so heavily on having to be in a deficit and having to restrict calories. And what it'll allow you to do is to build better habits, where you have everything in place prior to going into your next phase, whether that be a muscle building phase or that be a fat loss phase. So essentially what it's doing is it's allowing you to ingrain the habits and behaviors that are going to set you up for success in your subsequent phases. And then really when we think about maintenance, we have to realize that this is an extended time period. So it's not just going back for a week or two. Yes, I will utilize that in the case of a strategy, like an intermittent dieting strategy, like a diet break, where we'll go back to maintenance for 1 to 2 weeks. But when I talk about a phase, I'm talking about a substantial extended period of time. So maybe 8 to 12 weeks, where we really focus on eating enough to fuel training. We're looking at improving training performance to drive increases in body composition, so increases in lean body mass. And then also I'm looking to improve, health, biofeedback, and a lot of the lifestyle factors. And what I've really found maintenance phases to be beneficial for is that they allow me, to be able to help clients to like improve their sleep quality, which many, have either seen drop off during the diet itself, or there's a lot of people that come to me, they've never spent time in maintenance. They're either underfueling or overeating, and they don't have a lot of the essential life habits in place. So this is a time period where I say, listen, we're going to eat at maintenance. You're not going to have to worry about restricting yourself, but we're going to dial in the rest of the 23 hours out of your day that are outside of the gym. So let's improve your sleep quality. Let's improve your stress management abilities. And now that you're investing less energy into dietary restraint, we're going to invest more energy into building your stress resilience. This is another period that just being eucaloric or being back in energy balance, we can help to restore any hormones that were downregulated during a diet. Another thing that I find this to be extremely beneficial for is to help women with having more of a regular menstrual cycle, because whether a woman has just finished a diet or not, a lot of times we see that amenorrhea, so hypothalamic amenorrhea, happens during a prolonged dieting phase, but women can also get that just from the fluctuation in calories, like over restricting during the week and then overeating on the weekend. Or even we've even seen in certain clinical studies that even just high stress periods can cause the loss of the menstruation, or it could cause oligomenorrhea, which are those elongated and irregular periods of menstrual cycles. And then also during this time period, we're going to help to work on better hunger management, because you're going to be eating more. So spending time at maintenance helps us prime you for your next dieting phase, because it allows for better recovery, lower stress, and a break from dieting both physically and mentally. So I think overall, a lot of individuals need to shift their viewpoint or their perspective on maintenance phases, and stop viewing maintenance phases as a break from progress, because that's not what they are. It's not a phase where there's nothing to improve upon. We're improving upon your habits. We're improving upon your sleep. We're improving upon your stress, your training performance. So instead of thinking about it, a lot of times when I describe a maintenance phase, or I propose that to a new client that hasn't worked with me, hasn't bought in yet, or isn't familiar with the phase, and when they hear the term maintenance, they think, well, I'm not going anywhere. That's not what it is. They think about it as a step back. Really, it's a step to the side that's going to help set you up for success in the future. So I really like it to almost look at it as like a bow and arrow, and we're pulling back on the bow to be able to springboard you forward.
I think you summarized that really well. I don't have anything else like I could throw at that. The next question I want to get into is, what is your thoughts on using intermittent fasting versus continuous dieting for fat loss? I'll let you go with that because I know you're going to give some research stuff, and then I'm going to throw my in the trenches in there, that because I've been playing with intermittent fasting, but also fasting with some interesting results as well. So I'm curious.
Absolutely. So this was particularly, the question was just in regards to fat loss. So that's what we'll cover. I'm not going to go into for muscle gain or for autophagy benefits or for longevity, any of those things, because there's so many separate entities that intermittent fasting can be utilized for, that it would take an entire show just for us to cover that. And I would honestly, I would look to an expert to come on and cover that. So we'll probably do an episode on that. But when it comes to weight loss in and of itself, energy balance is the key underlying principle which drives results. So there are no differences in terms of results between you using an intermittent fasting approach where your eating window is compressed versus using a longer eating window when using the same calorie deficit in both conditions. So for example, say that your maintenance calories are 2,500 per day and you go into a 500 calorie deficit eating 2,000 calories per day, you're not going to see a difference in outcomes in terms of weight loss or fat loss, whether you consume those calories in an 8-hour compressed eating window, where the other 16 hours out of the day that you're fasting, versus eating those same 2,000 calories over, say, a 12 to 14 hour eating window. So when it comes down to intermittent fasting, you can use it as a tool to create a deficit, but it isn't more advantageous or beneficial from a fat loss perspective. So really, when I view intermittent fasting, it's just a tool in the toolbox. And really what it comes down to is the individual dieter themselves. As you know, I'm sure you can attest to this, Jeff, having worked with multitudes of different clients, as have I. It really is going to come down to the individual, because when it comes to fasting, it's people are usually on one end of the spectrum or the other. So what I found is some will find it easier to be in a deficit when their eating window is constrained. So say it's an 8-hour eating window. They find that it's easier to maintain that deficit when they only have 8 hours to eat. But for others, I find that a lot of people that utilize like the later time restricted eating, meaning that they skip breakfast, for instance, for some, it'll cause them to actually overeat in that period because they've had to suppress their eating early on in the day. So now they're so hungry and they spend the majority of their day not eating. So when they do get that open window, it's like all bets are off, and it causes them to overconsume calories by the time their eating window opens up. So it really comes down to a person's, someone's personal preference. But what I do advise, and whenever I have someone come to me with a history of this, if someone has a poor relationship with food or has a history of disordered eating behaviors, I will generally recommend against utilizing fasting approaches, whether it be intermittent fasting, alternate day fasting, any of the time compressed windows where there's restriction and then there's an open ability to eat, because generally what that's going to do is further perpetuate the restrict binge cycles that they've been struggling with. But then when it comes down, like Jeff, you had mentioned, with the research, there's actually been a ton of research just done this past year. So the last 10 to 15 years, intermittent fasting has become very popular. Within the last year, we've had a ton of clinical data done on this topic. And so they've done a lot of research where they've directly compared intermittent fasting and continuous dieting, meaning eating in an elongated period, to tease out whether there are differences in fat loss or health outcomes. So for example, there was just a 2022 study by Liu et al., where researchers conducted a 12-month study. So really, when we look at before, say, like 2020, a lot of the studies were very short interventions. So they looked at 4-week periods, 8-week periods. Now we've gotten to the point where they're extending these periods of time to really see, are there any benefits? Because in a short time period, it's really difficult to tease out the benefits, because they're only getting so many results within 4 to 8 weeks. So they've been doing a lot of 12-month studies. I'm going to cover another study that was a 10-year study looking at different trials within 10 years. So this is really interesting. It's more applicable because a lot of times someone's going to have to diet for longer than 4 to 8 weeks. So in the Loose study, what they did was they conducted a 12-month study with 139 participants to compare the effects of following a calorie-restricted diet with a normal eating window compared to an 8-hour intermittent fasting eating window. And then what they did was they analyzed participants in both groups to see the total amount of body weight loss, the body fat loss, their BMI, their waist circumference, and their improvements in metabolic markers. And when comparing the results and improvements from baseline between the group using the intermittent fasting approach that utilized that 8-hour eating window versus the daily calorie restriction approach using a regular eating window, as many of us would, they found no significant differences between the results individuals got using either approach. So regardless of whether a participant dieted using a compressed eating window of 8 hours or a regular eating window, there was no advantage to either approach in terms of the amount of body weight and body fat they lost, or the improvements in markers of things like insulin sensitivity and blood lipids. However, there was just a meta-analysis. So this is a study of studies. So I'm talking about the previous study that was a randomized controlled trial. So very controlled, but only one study with one group of participants. Well, there was just a meta-analysis done by Kim et al. That was released in September of this year. So just this past fall, that compared the effectiveness of intermittent energy restriction, which is one of the ways that they term intermittent fasting in the literature, versus continuous energy restriction across studies conducted from 2011 to 2021. So this was a 10-year period. Doesn't mean that these studies lasted 10 years. What it means was it did a meta-analysis of all these studies that were done within the last 10-year time period. So we see some of the earlier studies done, but also compared to some of the newer studies done. So we're looking at trials that some are 4 weeks and then some trials that are 12 months to get a more overall analysis or overall viewpoint of the outcomes of these approaches in comparison to one another. And this meta-analysis found that there was a slightly higher attrition or recidivism rate in groups utilizing intermittent calorie restriction approaches like intermittent fasting as compared to continuous energy restriction like continuous dieting. They also found no significant differences in changes in body weight, waist circumference, or body fat composition, so the body fat loss overall, between approaches. So really, when it came down to weight loss, fat loss, body composition, there was no differences between utilizing intermittent fasting or a regular eating window. However, they did find that continuous energy restriction led to better improvements in blood glucose and systolic blood pressure readings than intermittent approaches. So overall, I'd say, when I really look at it, it's really going to be suited to the individual. So intermittent fasting, it's an effective method of compressing your eating window, but it's not going to lead to greater or faster fat loss or additional metabolic benefits than continuous dieting. So when you guys hear, there's certain people that they have a bias towards certain interventions or certain approaches, just realize these are all tools in the toolbox. It's not something that you have to use or that you're going to get a better advantage from. It really needs to suit your preference, your psychology, your history of dieting. So I have so many people that come to me that have a poor relationship with food, telling them to go most of the day without eating and then have this open window where they eat larger meals or they have an ability to compress more of their calories. It's not a great intervention from them, especially from a weight loss perspective, because it often leads to compensatory overeating. So it's really coming down to the individual in general.
The only thing I really have to say with fat loss, I think you covered it pretty well on that. I think if you're in that fat loss phase, it's whatever you could do to be the most consistent that doesn't destroy you in terms of like, I'm so starving that I want to eat this wood that is in front of me. Absolutely. Or look the wallpaper. I think when, like you brought up a really good point early on, because I think you knew where I was going to go. When it comes to intermittent fasting and fasting as a whole, they serve their place oddly enough when you're doing like autophagy work, when you're doing other things in that nature. But I haven't really had many people when they're in a fat loss phase, be very successful when the windows get extended too long, meaning when their windows are less than like 10 hours of eating or things like that. It almost seems like you said, they will just naturally kind of overeat. It'll just be like, it just gets so hungry. They get so hungry, then over the top. I think that when you're dieting in a fat loss phase, keeping your blood sugar levels stable is more benefit to you long term than trying to starve yourself and punish yourself, is what I tell people. There's going to be some hunger component there, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of being in a cycle of sickness. And what I mean by that, mental sickness, where you're eating more than you need to eat because you're trying to hold to this window and it's actually fucking you long term. That's kind of my thoughts. Now, got anything else you want to touch on that one?
No, just real quick in the autophagy. Obviously, we would have to go into an hour-long conversation about this, but I think that we have to realize that a lot of people within the fat, like those that only talk about fasting, like that is their camp. They have a stake in the ground. They really often, they're looking at they're hyper-focusing on mechanisms. And they often will pull the autophagy lever. And really they'll talk about fasting and anti-aging benefits. And really, they're talking about autophagy, and it's a sexy word, man. And a lot of people, they hear that and they're like, oh, I want to go for that. They don't even know what it means. So really, when we look at autophagy, we have to realize that's a cellular process, and essentially where cells remove damaged, organelles and proteins and essentially eliminate pathogens. And here's the thing with that. Fasting isn't the only thing that equals autophagy, or, actually a better intervention for increasing autophagy is exercise in and of itself. So really, when it comes down to it, there are many benefits. We can induce autophagy just from being in energy deficit. So it's really hard when we look at these trials on fasting and they're inducing weight loss, that it's hard to tease the mechanisms out, because we may see it's really hard to measure first of all, it's autophagy in general in these studies. However, it's hard to tease apart, is this from energy restriction or is this from the independent benefit of fasting? And that's also what we see in the longevity studies. Like sometimes we'll see, mice studies and realize that they're fasting mice, or they're putting them in energy restriction since pretty much birth. And so that's something that we would never see clinically. Like no one's going to diet since the day they're out of the womb. So we really have to take some of these cell culture studies and some of these mice data into consideration and tread lightly with them, because we can't just extrapolate them over to regular individuals, especially those that are active populations looking to not only get the fat loss benefits, but also maintain muscle. Because one detriment that we do see from fasting trials is a loss of lean body mass. So that has been seen just most recently in 2021 in an alternate day fasting trial without an energy deficit. So they actually did a study, James Bett's group, which James Bett is someone that we spoke about previously with the breakfast study. That was one of our very early podcasts. They did a trial last year, 2021, where they looked at, are there independent benefits from fasting in and of itself? So what they did was they put people into energy maintenance, and they either had them do every other day fasting, so alternate day fasting, where they made up for the calories that they normally would eat on that that fasting day the next day, and then looked at the differences in body composition. Did that 24 hours of fasting improve insulin sensitivity? Did it improve markers of like blood lipids and cholesterol? And then also, what were the body composition changes? And really what they saw was they had less preservation of lean body mass in comparison to the group that ate in a normal window and ate 7 days per week, other than, at energy maintenance or at maintenance calories, rather than the alternate day fasting group. So it's really, there's so much research that's coming out on this topic. But really, when it comes down to fat loss, this was this person's question in and of itself. We don't see any benefits, any advantages. It's really going to come down to the individual. But Jeff, elaborate on, you've been experimenting with some stuff, so definitely share your experiences.
Man, shit. So this is where I struggle with talking about this, because you see people talking about this and then you see them resting them for, like, in some cases up to 2 years, which I'm like, that's just got to be a marketing ploy in my opinion. And I'll be honest with you, I think in some cases it's probably really beneficial. Meaning, like, here's the thing, man.
What type of fasting are you referring to, though?
I go to full on fast. I've deployed full on fast and had great success.
How long a periods of time?
I work it up to, I'll start with a 20-hour, so more intermittent fast. And then if they can handle that, then I'll go swing for the fences for the 24.
Okay. How often are you utilizing that?
I will utilize that one day, once a month. and then they're more into keto, and then I will kind of put 2 days of carbs in there. So I've kind of been playing around with different stuff. I have some who are dead in keto. I have some the day after fasting, they're like lower protein, higher fat, lower carbs, and then I slowly titrate the protein and carbs up as I swap the fat out. Okay. I played with it different times. I've found, I think personally, that for the autophagy work from what I've seen, it pairs better with keto from what I have seen on that, like in a full-blown keto diet. I've not seen much use of it in the carb cycle, but I only deploy that with people who they can like really cry with me on like a phone or something, and they've tried everything. Like, you know how it is, B. When you talk to a client, you could tell if they're really trying everything that they should be trying. Like, you could just feel that from them. And that's the way I'm going to deploy it. I think right now it's the hot topic in the industry. And I sometimes wonder, the people who respond, quote unquote, to the autophagy work, is it finally that, you know, they hit rock bottom and they realize like, well, shit, I'm here and I've got to like do this or nothing, or, and that's like a mental switch, or is it really doing the work? And I know this from personal. I have someone who's close to me and she had done it without even knowing it. And she's lost like 200 pounds. So what happened was she was doing keto, and then she got stuck, and then she stumbled on, it's Dr. Victor Largo.
Walter Longo. You're opening up the gates.
Yeah,
Let's go.
I'm not trying to open up the gates, but
we're going to discuss him now.
You know, so she did that, and she did up to 5 days, and I was like, holy shit. And she's like, yeah, I can see where you get like that mystical experience, because, you know, they talk about that, doing those cave fasts where you go take a fast for like 3 days and go put yourself in a cave or whatever, some shit to elicit some mystical experience. Dude, I'm all into all that weird shit. But she then moved back into keto, and it moved, like her weight loss moved again at that point. But now she's in carb cycle and she's moving. So I don't know if it kind of just, I don't know, man. I've seen it work both ways. I've seen some people go, this is my final point, so I guess I'm going to fucking go all in and make it work. And then I've seen other people that it just kind of worked and they just seem to like it. I don't know.
Okay, so let me ask you, are you utilizing, because Walter Longo, what his research is on is something called the fasting mimicking diet. And I'm seeing that become more popular. I'm getting a lot of inquiries with individuals that consult with me asking questions about that. So I've actually looked into it. So are you utilizing that type of model?
No, I'm not using his type of model.
Okay.
So I am actually using a fasting full on. Like, they do 24 hours. They could go up to, I've got the whole protocol written up with like the minerals and stuff that they need to do with their water and stuff like that. The problem I found is just most people, by the time they get to the third day, they're just ready to come out of it. Like, that's the day. It's almost like the keto flu day. When they're just like, damn, like it hits them in the face and they just like, I don't know if I could do this. But I have read a lot of it. Here's my thing.
Yeah,
okay,
let me get your thoughts on the fasting mimicking.
Let me just say this, okay, before this is how I feel about it. I don't know if the fasting mimicking diet comes into play with the majority of people who've already stopped multiple diet and exercise programs, who work out, who are pretty consistent, active. I don't know if this really, I don't know if it would be something I would deploy with them for quote unquote their weight loss resistance. Now, if you give me a person who's like 400 pounds, and they're 5'8", that might be a strategy I would deploy. Do you know what I mean? It depends.
It's so context specific.
It is context specific, and the guy makes money on it. So therefore it's kind of a little bit harder for me to be like, swallow this pill. And that's where I get like real funny with a lot of the stuff I see being pushed, because, you know, you have all these terms of this liver flush, that liver cleanse, this bile producing, blah, blah, blah. Like, I listen to podcasts where people like put castor oil, like in like they're doing weird shit that would like to help get the bile production, clean their liver, along with BPC and TB500, which I did know about those two coming into play. I've actually been using them with great success for my like overall healing. But dude, it's like the wild, wild west out there on some of this shit. And I feel like we've kind of like lost the context of going back to like what works for us and finding that individuality in the coaching. And it's just all mass marketing. It's cute shit to get people to pay attention.
Yeah. So I'm getting a lot of questions in consults where people will ask me, and they're people that they've referred to themselves, or a previous coach has labeled them as weight loss resistant or metabolically resistant. So they're at their wits' end. They've tried everything. They've sold out in fat loss. here's the confounding variable. A lot of these, first of all, they're females. They're susceptible to autoimmune disorders, or they have an autoimmune disorder. They have hypothyroidism. So they have these different hormonal issues. A lot of them are going through perimenopause. So there's a lot of confounding factors which are leading to higher rates of fat disposition. So if we look at menopause, obviously we're seeing a massive decrease in estradiol as well as progesterone. They're essentially seeing their natural hormone, levels or endogenous production of hormones tail off, because now they're no longer going to be fertile essentially. And so really with the fasting mimicking diet, for anyone out there that's not familiar with it, essentially what that is, it's a massive caloric deficit. So it's essentially what they say fasting mimicking, meaning that it's so low in calories it's almost like mimicking a fast. And so generally what that looks at, if you actually look at the research that Walter Longo did, it's generally at 30% of calories. So say that someone, a female, she's at 1,500 calories or a maintenance calorie, she'll go down to 450 calories, but it will be up to 50% of their calories. So if they go to the upper end of the range of female eating 1,500 calories, they'll be at 750 calories. Generally, it's very low protein, it is fat based, and then it's a lot of veggies. But it's mostly, half the calories generally will come from vegetables. And so high fiber, it's going to keep you a little bit satiated, but really, when we look at the research on it, so I know that Walter Longo has written books, but we have to realize that a lot of times books are confounded by, the fact that, most people aren't looking into the evidence behind there. So he was actually a researcher. I believe he's at USC, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially he would do like 30% of calories for 4 to 7 days. And then he would do a refeeding period. And then he typically would do that once a month. So 1 week out of every month, they'd go through that fasting. But when we really look at the evidence and the research, so I actually looked into this. If you actually look at the models in which they utilized, these were all animal models. So the benefits that they found on them, much of the evidence was done in mice. And so, it suggests that it's helping with the health of cells, but we have to realize that the life cycle of a mouse, it's much shorter. So, 1 week in a mouse is months in a human. So we have to realize that most people, first of all, I've had a lot of people come to me, especially a lot of females that have went through this fasting mimicking diet. It's very stressful for them. So their stress hormones are through the roof. They're losing muscle tissue. Those that are hypothyroid or have issues.
See, that's what I'm getting at. You're talking, you're talking about a good point there. That's my argument. That like the studies, I would want to see these people they were doing the studies with. I would want to know what their exercise background was, what their dieting background was, things like that, because I know for a fact when you start doing stuff like that, you are going to lose muscle tissue. It's just no way around it, right? And if you're getting some of these women who've already are in a fucked position, I don't know. I've seen some of the results online, but then I don't know if it's kind of like the whole mystery of, oh my God, I hired this coach. Now I'm paying this amount of money and I got to make it work. So suddenly where maybe with Brandon, you might've done it 85%, but now with Billy Bob, you're doing 100%. So I don't know. I think it goes both ways.
So I'm going to be honest with you. When I've had people consult with me or ask me, like, do I think it's going to work? Or they've gotten results from it and they've told me, hey, listen, this is finally something that worked for me. I don't doubt that. You are open to your own interpretation. If you buy into something, there's a placebo effect that can greatly impact your psychology, can greatly impact your physiology. And when you think you're at the end of the rope, essentially, and you're at wit's end, you've tried everything else. And maybe like we've spoken about, mistakes people make within the dieting phase, overestimating their calories or underestimating their calories rather, overestimating their energy expenditure. When someone tells you, listen, you're going to eat just veggies and a couple portions of fat per day in this 4 to 7 day period, you're going to drop, because if your maintenance calories are 1,500 calories and you go down to 450 or 750 calories, it's inevitable. The body is going to liberate. No one is exempt from starvation. Doesn't matter how metabolically resistant another coach labeled you. If you are in a 50 to a 70% deficit, which is what this fasting mimicking diet does, you're going to lose body weight. And so you're going to see that scale weight loss, and maybe that will reinvigorate you and that will motivate you going forward to be more adherent to the next plan you get from that coach. But I do think it is a drastic measure. And I do worry about some of the females, especially that already have downregulated hormones. They're going into menopause. They're suffering from a lot of symptoms. And then they're going into more of these extreme approaches. But any extreme approach, whether it be a protein sparing modified fast, a fasting mimicking diet, a really low calorie approach, it's going to work. And if we really look at some of the greatest weight loss trials, there's a study done by Roy Taylor out of the UK. It's a diabetes trial. And I'm totally blanking on the name. It was a few years ago. And they put participants on an 800 calorie liquid diet, and they saw the largest remission in type 2 diabetes that they've ever seen in any study, but that was a drastic diet. And so we see outcomes, but we really have to see what are these things leading to in the moment in and of itself, but what is it going to be long term? Because can you really maintain 450 to 750 calories long term? Most likely not. So really, when I'm thinking about it, these are not things I employ personally. However, it's not something that I would say it's never going to work for you, because energy balance is going to come into play no matter what approach you take.
I could throw something out there that you'll GW 50156 in theory would do the same thing that moving over to keto, these other diets do, and that's that SARM, this mislabeled as SARM, but it actually switches your fuel sources. And that's what a lot of it is, what you read. I can say this. I think before you go down the fasting mimicking protocol, to wrap this up so we could get on to the next topic, I think B would agree with me on this. Switch over to keto. Do something different that you haven't done in a while. And I do mean full-blown keto, the lower protein, the real high fat, like the 70-25-5 version. That one does good. Lauren Conlon actually told her, I was talking to her, she tried it with a client. It worked for the client she was with. There seems to be something about sometimes just switching sources over. It almost just resets you. And I think I agree with Brandon there. It might just be you're like, oh shit, now this is different. I'm just going to make it work. And unfortunately, the thing I don't like about our industry, a lot of it is sexy marketing. And I'm just like, I'm more of that hurt your feelings kind of marketing. Like I was telling we were talking about this. Yeah. I was telling my clients today, I walk through a mall, I walk through a grocery store. I don't see fucking health. I see my future being secure. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just an ugly truth to say out loud, but it's the truth. And anyone who's listening, walk through and go see what I'm seeing. You can look at people and see the hypothyroidism. You can look at women and see PCOS. You can look at dudes and see definitely the metabolic syndrome taking place, low T phenomenon. There's a lot more that people need to be looking at than just this sexy new thing that came out. And to me, it's not making the industry better. It's just keeping in the same shithole that it's been in for 10 plus years since Advocare came on the scene. And that's my 2 cents. The next topic. Oh God damn, another fat loss one. Should I focus on diet or training /cardio if my goal is fat loss? How about all? But I'll let you handle that one because I know that you like talking. I will say this: Brandon sold me on steps, so I'll just be like, steps, work out with weight, and put yourself in a moderate core deficit, and voila. It's all of it. And I think when you start going, and I think that's the summary I could say about what we just talked about. When you start going to these far extremes, like, well, should I do like 4 hours cardio a day? Well, should I work out 3 times a day with weights? Well, should I like eat bananas 10 times a day? You just start getting in these things and it just doesn't do you any good. I think it's all about consistency and combining everything together to get the results that you want that can equal your habits being at a top line level, because habits carry you through the times of shitty motivation and shitty inspiration.
No, I'm really glad the direction you went in that, because honestly, when I received this question, even when you were reading it off, the first thing that I'm thinking about when I hear this question is why choose between the two, or why choose between either exercise or nutrition when it comes to fat loss? Because there are so many benefits to taking a multi-pronged or multifaceted approach, which dials in both your nutrition, your training, your cardio, and even your steps, your daily movement. And so when it comes to losing weight, obviously nutrition is going to be the biggest lever we can pull, as we need to induce an energy deficit to lose weight. And that's most effectively done through adjusting our dietary intake. But if you were to only focus on nutrition, you only create an energy deficit, you don't worry anything about exercise, you don't care about training, care about steps and things of that sort, you're going to lose weight. However, you're going to lose muscle as well. And really, when the goal is fat loss, like this person didn't say, should I focus on diet or training /cardio if weight loss is the goal, scale weight loss? They asked for fat loss. So I'm taking it very specific in terms of that being the goal. What we're looking to do is to lose quality weight, meaning losing fat and maintaining muscle or building muscle. So in this person's case, they weren't that active. They were an early recreational trainee. So they were focused. They had this kind of dichotomous viewpoint. Well, should I just focus on the diet in the incoming new year with my goal being fat loss, or should I be focusing on weight or on exercise? And really, when it comes down to it, we want to be able to improve our body composition overall. So in order to accomplish this, we need to, resistance train and stay active. And by using a multifaceted approach, we can induce an equal deficit, so an equal energy deficit, if you just did, as compared to if you just did caloric restriction alone. But because your energy expenditure is higher, you have more muscle mass, so your resting metabolic rate is higher. You're going to be able to diet on higher calories. So that's going to help from an adherence perspective. But then we also have to consider the benefits of each approach. So we obviously know from a nutrition perspective, it's going to be the easiest way to reduce calories is just to constrain the amount of foods that we're eating, whether it be food type, macronutrient composition, the amounts, the portions, whatever it may be. But from an independent benefit from exercise, we need to look at what other benefits does exercise provide us with that could be advantageous when combining it with a proper nutritional intervention for fat loss. So really, when we think about it from a habits perspective, I've always noticed that when I have people come to me and they're sedentary or they're not regularly training, that they're that person that has been in and out of the gym throughout their life, but they've never been consistent. However, when they decide fat loss is the goal and I say, listen, I'm not letting you lose fat, I'm not letting you go into a fat loss phase unless you resistance train 2 to 3 times per week, because I want you to maintain your muscle tissue, because we know that losses in lean body mass or muscle tissue predispose us to being more likely to regain fat after a diet is done because of the loss in resting metabolic rate and also the increasing drive to eat when we lose lean body mass, called hyperphagia, which we've covered in the body fat overshooting episode. So when I do that with a client, I say, listen, we have certain negotiations. So you want to lose fat? I'm going to be able to do that from a nutrition perspective, but I need your resistance training. I'll create a program for you. It'll be low barrier entry. All I need is 2 to 3 resistance training sessions a week. I know that's more than you've done previously. However, it's enough to get the benefits and also, benefits from an energy expenditure perspective, but also from a building muscle and maintaining muscle perspective. And often what I notice is when that person hasn't been losing fat previously, so they've just done nutrition with me, they've been not training regularly, when I put them into a weight loss diet or a fat loss diet, and now they're in an energy deficit and they're training, they're much more adherent with their diet because everything is paired. So it increases their motivation to stay on point because they really want to get the full maximized benefits. They feel like they're putting more work in and they're putting more of an investment in. So they want to reap more of the rewards. But then also we have to look at some of the other benefits that resistance training and staying active allows for us. So it's going to improve insulin sensitivity. It's going to help with metabolic flexibility. It's going to help with nutrient partitioning. So we're going to be able to more efficiently utilize the right fuels at the right time. And it's also, with that nutrient partitioning perspective, it's going to allow for better partitioning of incoming nutrients into lean body mass or into muscle tissue rather than into fat tissue. We're also going to see from exercise perspective in and of itself that we're going to see increased mitochondrial activity at the muscle tissue. So that's going to increase your oxidative capacity of our cells. So essentially, you're going to burn fat more efficiently. And then also, exercise in and of itself is a more effective way to lose visceral body fat than is nutrition in and of itself. So for those that come to me that are already insulin resistant, or they're on the verge of type 2 diabetes, or they're pre-diabetic, we're going to see greater improvements. We actually see a loss of visceral body fat without weight loss. So when we combine, that's just from exercise in and of itself. So if we combine exercise with an energy deficit from good, wholesome nutrition, we're going to see a massive loss in visceral body fat, which we covered in the body fat loss or the stubborn body fat episode. And that's really going to help from a metabolic health perspective. And then also, a lot of times what I find is there's a lot of individuals that are in their 40s or 50s, and often it is females, to be honest with you. And what I find is resistance training wasn't something that they grew up doing. A lot of guys, when they're in their 20s or 30s, this was more of something that we grew up in the gym. However, a lot of females didn't. They don't feel comfortable. So I really try to expand upon other female specific benefits. So I always try to, especially women that are in perimenopause or postmenopausal, I really try to hit on the bone health and the bone mineral density benefits that are provided from resistance training. So loading your skeletal system is going to increase bone mineral density. And that's something that we see decrease not only from dieting, but also from, the female hormonal patterns that happen, the fluctuations and the decrements that we see through menopause. So overall, I think if fat loss is your goal and improving your body composition, we should look to dial in not only your nutrition, but also your training and activity, rather than just taking one approach and trying to get all the benefits out of just one, because you're going to reach an area of diminishing returns sooner than if you took a multifaceted approach.
I really have nothing else to comment on that other than what you said there. I think that when it comes to, this is what I always get at. There is a big difference between people understanding fat loss and chasing weight loss. And a lot of women get confused between the two. And I'm like, well, I get weight matters, but I mean, it only matters if you throw yourself from a 3rd story building in regards to terminal velocity. kicking in. Otherwise, the only thing that knows what you weigh is gravity. So we got time for one more because you got a hard stop. We got 2 questions.
I just expanded to 5 minutes, so I have till 105.
Okay.
We can get both in.
All right. Thoughts on menstrual cycle periodization for training? I think it depends upon the woman. I've seen it play out with some need deloads from what I have seen, a little bit more than others. And then others can just kind of train on through and truck and monitor their biofeedback. So I'm curious to see what you think on this and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so this menstrual cycle periodization when it comes to training has become a much more spoken about topic within our industry and especially within the research. But when we actually look into it, if you actually look into the menstrual cycle periodization literature, what you'll see is they're drastically different approaches. So generally what those will look like, they will standardize a woman's menstrual cycle to 28 days, whereas we know that a woman's menstrual cycle can range, a healthy menstrual cycle can range anywhere from 21 to 35 days. So they're going to use that stock standard 28-day approach. And generally what they'll do is during the follicular phase, the first half of the menstrual cycle, the first 2 weeks, they're going to have women train 5 times per week. Then during the luteal phase, due to the lowering of estradiol and the increase in progesterone, they're going to have women train only 2 days per week. So it's there's a dichotomous difference between the two. So think about it. First 2 weeks, weeks of the month, you're training 5 days per week. And then the last 2 weeks, you're training 2 days a week. And that's a lot of the interventions that we see within literature. And really, when I think about it, I think that using a pre-programmed model like we do in this research to a female's training periodization approach based purely on the menstrual cycle is something we just don't have enough evidence on to rely on. And doing so kind of discounts the importance of treating each client as an individual. So for example, like Jeff, you kind of mentioned, I have some clients that experience really rough menstrual cycles and a lot of changes over the course of their cycle, which I need to account for and adjust for, but that's on an individual basis. But then I also have other females that don't exhibit any symptoms. So if I were to take this stock standard approach to menstrual cycle periodization, where I set their training up in advance and only in accordance to what phase of their cycle they're in, I wouldn't be taking into account their weekly biofeedback into consideration and really catering the programming to that individual. Because I'd be giving every female that I have, it's, hey, you're a female, it's sex specific, you're getting this programming. So you're going to train when you're in your follicular phase 5 times a week. And then when you get into your luteal phase, regardless how you feel, it's 2 days a week. And I just don't believe in that. And I think we really need to consider also the cognitive burden that comes along with constantly changing training according to a menstrual cycle phase. And, really, I think about this in all aspects of coaching, but whenever I'm, implementing a new approach, I'm looking at whether the benefit outweighs the cost of using that intervention at hand. And right now, we just don't know if there's a benefit for naturally menstruating females to change training in advance according to what phase they're in. So I think we need to treat each client just like we would our male clients. We wouldn't automatically deload them after 4 weeks, just because, every male, put in X research study. So I really think that we need to treat each client as an individual, not just as a female. And a lot of people who promote this tend to program in this manner because the client is female, not realizing or not taking into consideration how that client feels during their menstrual cycle. So like I mentioned, I have some clients that it doesn't seem to affect them at all. So, they don't need to change things just based on what phase of their menstrual cycle they're in. I'm looking to utilize, auto-regulation and a reactive approach to programming based off their biofeedback. And what I do throughout the course of their cycles is I'll track trends and patterns over time. So I actually do that with their weight as well. I'm looking at, week 1 of their follicular phase versus week 1 of their next follicular phase. So I'm looking at that with weight trend patterns as well during a fat loss phase to see, because we can't just compare, especially with females, week 1 to week 2, because of the fluctuations in water retention and the hormone fluctuations that a naturally menstruating female experiences. So I don't like the pre-programmed manner. I don't do that with even my male clients. It's not like I utilize a paradigm where it's a 4-to-1 paradigm, meaning you're going to do 4 weeks of accumulation and 1 week of a deload. And I use that with everyone. There are some clients that after 4 to 5 weeks, they do need a deload because that is based off their individual recovery capabilities and their stress levels and their lifestyle. Then I have other clients that they go 8 to 10 weeks and they don't need a deload until week 9 or say week 11. And so it's all based on the individual. And I really think that that's a really context specific and important consideration of one-on-one coaching. There is no stock standard approach, or I personally don't believe in one.
I agree with you. I've never done that. I was laughing because my friend was talking shit about Heidi winning the Olympia. He's like, it's very obvious by this man's physique that he deloads every 4 weeks. And I was just laughing so hard. And that's why I tell the young kids when I see in my gym, they're like 18 years old and they're like fucking bracing to do all these exercises. I'm like, get underneath the barbell and barbell row. I'm like, those things serve you a purpose down the road. I think everything tends to be sexy anymore in the fitness space. And I think it comes down to individuality. Like you said, I got some girls that can blast it and they're like, oh shit, I haven't taken a deload in 12 weeks. What do you think? I'm like, well, I mean, if you're progressing and you have no real issues, then I keep going if you enjoy doing it like that. But I have others who, dude, like life beats them up. And then every couple of weeks, they kind of need to ease back off a little bit.
I think with all these approaches, what has happened is coaches, they don't have the skills to individualize. So they really don't have the ability, they don't have the skill set and the experience to read biofeedback and adjust on the fly for that specific client. And they also want cookie cutter templates that they can use with everyone. So they want an approach, they want a system, they want their method. So utilizing fasting mimicking dieting with all their weight loss resistant clients, or utilizing menstrual cycle periodization with all their female clients. It makes it easy. It makes it so they can standardize things and just blast out these programs and accumulate client after client. And I'll tell you, I take a much more individualized approach to program design, to nutritional programming, as well as to my individual check-ins. And it's much more of an elongated process. It takes me a ton of time. And this is something off air you and I have discussed many times in the past. It does constrain the amount of new clients I can take on at one time, but also I know my skill set in terms of being able to read someone's biofeedback, develop a relationship with them, and really cater to the individual. And that's something that I learned through personal training, because when I did personally train in a gym one-on-one, I went off how that client felt on that specific day. Yes, I would have something written out in advance based on their specific goals. So I might have someone in a specialization phase, meaning that we were focusing on certain muscle groups and we're really catering towards that, but it was also based on their feedback. And I really learned to read that both in person through their body language and their feedback visually, as well as, orally. But that really shaped who I am as a coach now. And I feel like a lot of coaches, they got into the online space so they could kick back on a beach and just do these preset programs where they send out these cookie cutter emails and these programs and these sexy Excel spreadsheets. However, there's really no meat behind it. So that's what I say.
Dude. Couldn't have said it better, man. I think that everybody's jockeying to be on that beach. I'm like, don't you get fucking bored of that life? Like after a few weeks, I know if I take 4 days off work, by the second day, I'm like looking like to go like get into trouble doing shit I shouldn't. I'm like, oh, so bored, better do something I shouldn't be doing. All right, last one. Advice on how to handle Christmas holiday. Like you would any other fucking holiday. Be a grown-up. That's my advice. But I'll let B talk to it. Man, we did like a really good one about Thanksgiving. And it seems like every year people always ask for this. And every year I'm kind of like, at what point do people kind of recognize that it's a slippery slope for them and show some responsibility and just don't go into it going like, all right, well, mom's making the mashed potatoes, so I'm going to have some of that, and Nana's apple pie. And then, Christine's going to make it. It's like, if you don't want to eat it, don't fucking eat it. If it hurts their feelings, that's their issue. You got to think about how you feel. I eat based upon how I feel. And everyone who knows me, my family, which isn't much, and my friends who are more, don't give me shit. So my whole thing is be a grown up, do what makes you feel best. And if you want to drink a bottle of wine and eat all the turkey and fill yourself up with Haagen-Dazs, that makes you happy, feel free to do it. But if a week later you feel like shit and you have 10 pounds on you that you don't like, then understand that was the consequence of what you did on Christmas. So what's your take on it, B?
Yeah, maybe, it's interesting because every year I get these same questions, and I usually, I've done multiple podcasts on the topic of holiday eating or eating around goal-oriented occasions or things of that sort, and really how to navigate the difficulties of dieting in public events and stuff. And we also did a full episode over an hour going over Thanksgiving, which is really applicable to the holidays in general. Like it was a holiday podcast. We just happened to release it prior to Thanksgiving, but it wasn't just specific to Thanksgiving. This was to be applied to all the holidays within that 6-week period where most people gain weight. However, I'm going to specifically talk about Christmas because I think generally Christmas is the holiday that the majority of us look forward to most during the year. And it's also something that we've looked forward to since our childhoods. Because think about like just the memories that we have. It was a time of the year that most of us got presents. And that was something that was really big and exciting for us, Santa Claus and all those things. And there's also a lot of food related customs and cultures that go along with it. So, although I'm all for, clients having ambitious goals and helping them to improve their body composition and health, there are certain occasions, man, like the Christmas holiday where, whether you celebrate Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, I generally don't think that most should try to diet right through the occasion, as this is once a year. And I think that most people should try to enjoy it without feeling like they need to stick to a deficit. So this year, personally, I'll tell you from my own, coaching perspective, this is one of the first years that I don't have anyone dieting, not a single client I have dieting through this actual holiday. And in the past I have, because I've had certain people competing at early events like the Arnold Classic and things of that sort. So ultimately, I think we need to take two things into account when deciding what to do with our nutrition this upcoming Christmas. And that's our priority and our preference. So if you have a time-oriented goal that's approaching where you feel you need to stay on point to achieve, by all means do so, because I'm going to support that, anything that's goal specific for that person. But if you're someone who's dieting for a goal that doesn't have a clear-cut end date, like a competition or a photo shoot or something that you really need to be ready for, I'd recommend if you're someone that's actually actively dieting, which I wouldn't recommend during this holiday season. However, say that you're someone you're actively dieting, you don't know, should I stick to my diet or should I go off the diet? Let's not look at it as like on the wagon, off the wagon. Let's look at it in a different context. So what I would suggest, and this is what I would have a client do, and I've utilized in the past, is taking a non-linear dieting approach where we would hit their weekly deficit target on the days prior to and following Christmas. But on Christmas itself, whether that's Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, whichever day that you celebrate, at least raise your calories up to maintenance so that you can enjoy yourself without worrying about needing to stay in a deficit, which will most likely result in you feeling both mentally and physically restricted on the day itself. So really, when it comes down to it, try to let yourself enjoy yourself, but really realize enjoyment doesn't mean overindulgence. It can be enjoying yourself in moderation. There's nothing wrong with that. Stick with the habits, the behaviors, and the decisions that are going to make you feel best. So if you're someone like myself, I don't really partake in any of the desserts and stuff. It just, from a digestive perspective, it doesn't sit well with me. So whether I'm dieting or I'm in a maintenance phase or I'm in a building phase like I am now in a surplus, I'm not going to eat it because I'm not going, I eat things that feel, sit well with me. Not things I like, but things that like me. And so really when it comes down to it, you need to make the personal choice, but you also have to take personal accountability for your choice. So don't say, don't come back or, and say, well, my aunt made me eat this, or, if you're a grown adult, you can have that conversation. You can express, you could merely take a minute or two instead of succumbing to someone else's peer pressure. You could just say, listen, Aunt Sally or, Uncle Jim, I really appreciate that you make this every year and it's wonderful, but it's just something that it's not within my top 3 items that I prefer, or, I'm not, I'm right now I'm working towards a goal. I'm trying to maintain my habits. I want to enjoy myself, but I want to do so in moderation. I don't want to eat something that's going to trigger me to overeat because I'm going to feel worse than I would if I did enjoy that. So really when it comes down to it, in everything in life, and this is advice, honestly, for the next coming year, because this will be the last podcast Jeff and I record, in order to achieve drastically different results than you have in the past, you may have to make drastically different changes and try a new approach than you have previously. So if you're that person that has fallen off every year at Christmas because you've overindulged and you've given into everyone else's wants and needs, where they've told you, hey, listen, let me fill your plate again. If that's something that you notice has been something that has spiraled you down, out of control, don't do that this year. Take a different approach, enjoy yourself, but do so in moderation and align your actions with your ambitions and your goals. And that's my best advice for you guys. This is going to be, you guys, the last podcast that we record. We're going to have one next week with Danny Lennon, incredible podcast that we recorded a few weeks ago in advance. But I want to wish all of you guys, an incredible Christmas or whatever celebratory occasion that you guys partake in, as well as a happy new year. This is your crew at Chasing Clarity. We appreciate all your support over the last 9 or 10 months that we've been doing this. And we're looking forward to being back with you guys in 2023.
B, what a good way to summarize that. I think that you hit all that on the head. I just look at it like this, man. I think people are too fearful of these days, and there's only a few really over the course of the year. The bigger question is, yourself best. Can you have a meal or two that's off and get right back on track? Or does it cause you to go down skid row and you're off the track for like weeks? You know what I mean? And only you can answer that question. And if you have a coach, be honest with them. And if you don't have a coach, you're interested in, be and myself are taking clients for the new year if you guys are interested as well.
100%.
But on my half, me and my boys, thank you all for everyone who supports me, because without your all support, my kids wouldn't have the great life that they have access to. So I really appreciate that on your all's behalf. And if there's anything that B and I could ever do for anyone who's listening, cover anything or speak on anyone's podcast or be able to have conversations with, feel free to reach out to us. We do this because we actually enjoy each other's company and our time together weekly. But with that being said, everyone have a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year, because we'll be recording after the New Year. But you guys will love that one on Danny. I didn't speak a word because I just sat there and listened, and I was just like, interesting. So it was definitely a monster episode. But B, have yourself a good one, man. I hope it's badass. Everyone else, thank you again for your support over the year. We really appreciate it. 2023 is going to be even better. Later.